Building a sales funnel full of qualified quality leads is massively challenging for small business owners. We don't have the sales teams to drive it, we don't have the budgets for the ads, and we just don't have the time to spend hours and hours on social media or sending cold emails out just to get rejected and blocked. However, today I spoke with the founder of Salesforge, which is an AI-driven sales tool to do the heavy lifting for you, to actually have an AI bot do the outreach and actually connect with people and nurture those leads towards a end game, whatever that call to action might be for your business. We talked about a bunch of other stuff besides. He's an incredibly intelligent guy. He talked very fast, so you might want to slow down the recording when you listen to it. But we covered subjects such as building a sales funnel, of course, about marketing, about scaling, about when and why not to hire people, about automation, and a bunch of other super interesting stuff besides. So if you're looking to build a more consistent flow of quality leads into your business, check this episode out, and I think you'll learn a lot. So the question is this: how do entrepreneurs like us, who don't have an endless supply of cash, how do we leverage the best apps, virtual assistants, automation tools, and systems to scale our businesses, increase our profits, and have more time to do what we love to do each day? That is the question, and this podcast will give you the answer. My name's Dr. Steve Day, and this is Systemize Your Success. Hello and welcome to Systemize Your Success. I'm Dr. Steve Day, and today I'm joined by Frank Sondors, who is the CEO of Salesforge. Salesforge is an innovative platform for leveraging AI to enhance sales outreach and developing a sales pipeline. And this is something that I have tried, I'm not going to say failed at, but tried hard at over the years to actually not use AI tools to do it, but to do it myself. And I know how hard it is. So I'm super excited about speaking to Frank to find out like what he is doing to make that easier for us business owners, to actually be able to generate quality qualified leads, that's what I'm trying to say, and actually increase sales without having to do all of the legwork ourselves. This is one podcast I've been really excited and looking forward to. So Frank, massive warm welcome to you, and I'm looking forward to this one.
Thanks for having me. Yeah, I've been doing this for well over a decade. So I've been in sales for well over a decade, and I started really my career at Google. And when you say it's difficult, yes, it is very, very difficult. It's actually as difficult as essentially running ads on Google Ads platform. I typically say, cold email is not, and it's not as easy just to let me send you, a few emails here and there. Due to everything that has happened in the last few years, essentially Google doing more policing on emails, and essentially users having also email fatigue with getting a bunch of emails out there, right? It just becomes more and more difficult. But also the other things that people just don't think about really is that you have just generally more competition for the inbox, right? So people get just, a bunch of different emails, whether that's from newsletters, right? And then there's cold emails and then a bunch of other emails, right? And just your inbox, you're probably like a lot of essentially buyers out there get at least 100 emails in a day. That's how many emails. And a lot of them just don't read any more emails as well these days, unless they know the person that's coming from and so on and so forth. So it's very hard these days, A, just to land in the primary mailbox of your recipient, and B, actually make them to respond back to you. Because we're all of us, selling different softwares, different services, you name it, right? We all try, sometimes targeting really the same people out there, the head of marketing, at August or whatever, you name it, and trying to sell them something, right? And they just get a lot of communication coming their way, and they're also struggling on their end, right? But so it is very, very difficult. And so yeah, I've been doing this for over a decade. I've been in frontline sales, a bunch of different companies, and then I led a sales team of about 50 people. And that was me, my last gig. It was growth at all costs. It was all about having more and more headcount to try and hit our pipeline targets and our revenue targets. And I thought to myself back then, hey, wait a minute, there must be a better way of acquiring these sort of what we call net new dollars, a lot more efficiently with a lot less heads, in the equation. And why wouldn't we essentially run a software stack, right? And have a process in place, which essentially can help you to become significantly leaner and meaner. And the reason why I'm saying that this is actually possible and why this is needed, actually, maybe the first one, let's start with that. Why is it needed? So I hired hundreds of salespeople in my lifetime, and also fired hundreds of salespeople in my lifetime. And typically for every 10 salespeople that you would hire into your organization, maybe one person is like really what's called natural, right? The natural, so they're so good at sales, right? From the day zero. And then 2 to 3 people have to be trained up to be somewhat good as a person that's really natural. And then 60% is what I would typically say, which is typically true, is dead wood. And you know, it sounds harsh, but that's how it is. If you've been a sales leader, if you've been a CEO of a company or a CFO, and you know these metrics, you know how many people come and go, and who is accretive, who isn't accretive, and you typically know that 20% of your sales force is actually contributing in a lot of cases 80% of the pipeline or the revenue. And so these are very, very normal numbers in a lot of organizations for different reasons. And I thought to myself, you know, what if there was a way to reduce the 60%, you know, within the organizations, and then just increase the output levels of the 40%? How would the software has to look like? What is it that needs to really happen? Because ultimately, the big line item that I'm going after in the P&L is what's called the CAC, the cost of customer acquisition. And because that's going through the roof. So essentially, the ability to acquire, you know, new customers and the ability to acquire new dollars in an organization is becoming more expensive over time due to inflation, a bunch of other things, due to more competition, essentially, and so on and so forth. So really, one of the main things you can kind of go after in there is really labor, trying to figure out how can I do ultimately the same output levels, but with the fewer humans, or maybe more output, right, with fewer humans. And that is something that's possible, or became possible a couple of years ago, right? When we in OpenAI announced ChatGPT, the whole world went crazy around it. And then the last wave, something that we've seen quite well, I believe, on LinkedIn and just generally on the internet, is AI agents, right? The ability for you to spin up some form of co-pilots or fully autonomous autopilots to be able to help you to assist to do exactly the same task. And that's really supercharging your existing workforce and alleviate the pressure essentially to hire all these extra heads to help you hit your target. So the moment is now. So this is why if you go to San Francisco today in the Bay Area, and if you go to any coffee shop or any networking event, all those guys there are building AI agents. You're not going to hear anything apart from AI agents, AI infrastructure, AI agent application layer, this and that, you know, for different areas, sales, finance, etc. Because you know, we live in a capitalist society, right? So we everybody's looking at margins, everybody's looking at profits and all that jazz, right? So, and we're finally at the level where we're going through this what we call software revolution, where we will see just leaner and meaner organizations as we progress. And we're already, by the way, seeing that in the US in particular, when a startup is being created, let's say out of Y Combinator, so the number one accelerator in the world, you see that these teams produce significantly more revenue per head. And that's all unlocked due to large language models, due to AI agents, and a bunch of other automation things that essentially enables you to do that.
Obviously, you can go on and talk about this for absolutely hours and
Yeah.
hours. And I think that you obviously are passionate about it and have a massive knowledge base behind all this. And I just wanted to sort of really, just before you just go on and tell us more about like the solutions that you found and everything, is like, look, go back actually, just take a step back and just tell people the why behind what you do. I know that you said there's the challenge and you said the 40% and you know the cost of having that 60% on the payroll, etc. But why you personally put the time and effort in to do this? What's your story behind this? And what was the pains and challenges that you felt that you were like I need to actually dedicate like my life to actually doing something about this? And what's your hope? What's your vision for the change you want to see in the world?
So for me, it was very typical, like to many other founders, essentially, you know. So yeah, you know, I've been in the shoes of the head of sales, you know, the VP sales, and had this massive sales org, right? And I always, and a typical sales leader has to think about the CAC, right, the efficiencies, right, and how to acquire these new customers, how to acquire the, you know, new revenue, with a you know leaner and meaner team, you know, and the software that I was using, the what I would say that is the legacy tech. That software is built around bigger teams, more headcounts, because essentially more headcount means more revenue in an organization. At least back in the days, that was the case, but it's not anymore the case. And you need to build sort of this new breed of software. So I decided to take up, you know, the challenge on me to do that exactly, right? So I left the business and really I went down, you know, this rabbit hole of becoming essentially poor, you know, becoming a startup founder, going after this problem. And I think many startup founders do exactly that. They experience a problem, you know, in the previous, you know, work life, whatever they were doing, right? And they're like, wait a minute, I had this huge problem that nobody was addressing this, neither a service provider or, you know, a software vendor, whatever that is. Nobody was really properly solving this. And then the question becomes, you know, is this problem big enough to go after this? Is the TAM big enough for this? And if the answer is yes, then I highly recommend you leave your job and you go and solve that problem, right? So we have a lot of problems in the world, and we just need a lot of smart cookies out there to be solving these problems. So really, it was my own personal pain. And I was also, apart from being a head of sales, I was also typically the what you would describe the top rep, always hitting targets, always always hitting the milestones. But I also thought to myself, hey, wait a minute, a lot of things that I personally do as a top sales rep in a lot of organizations is very, very repetitive. So what I do, it has nothing to do because I'm smart or whatever. I just do the grind and I'm very persistent, and I just follow a process. Now I thought to myself, okay, so if a lot of humans cannot follow the process that I follow, right, to be really good at my job, what if I would dump everything that I know about sales into a software, into an AI agent, right, and essentially replicate myself? So really what I'm trying to do personally, this is my personal mission, is to really replace myself. And, so I always used to build my own pipeline. I never had any SDRs ever in my life. So I always was what's called a full cycle sales rep. So I never needed to source, get provide run from some, SDR or whatever. And I just thought, there's definitely a lot of these things can, if they're repetitive, you can just, build an agentic capability that's really good, what's called a vertical AI agent that just does this end to end, is being able to go after the ideal customer you're going after, send an email, for example, have a communication back and forth, and actually book a meeting. It can be done from a technical standpoint. So even from a technical standpoint, it can be done. Then as I said, a lot of these, repetitive jobs that a lot of people don't want to do. There's a lot of people that just don't want to especially build pipeline for them. It's very difficult. There's a lot of grind. And if that's the case, then these autonomous capabilities in the form of an autopilot or copilot is where you need to invest the time to build those. And typically a domain expert should naturally build that, right? So if you've been doing this for many years, these are the best people building that stuff, right? So
Okay. And where did you get your ideas from? Like you said about how you worked in sales, etc., for many years. But how did you land your first customers when you started your business and actually get started, which obviously then led to what you're doing now, or which way around did it come? Where did you start out with your sales journey when you started your own business? Was it using a similar system to this, or was it using, as you say, your own techniques and then building off the back of that?
So I was doing everything, and I think as a founder, you have to be doing everything in the early days, and especially things that was called that don't scale. You can read it by Paul Graham. If you just Google it, things that don't scale. But Paul Graham, just read a lot of that. Essentially, you just do a lot of different things that don't scale. Whether you are pinging your network on LinkedIn um, or you're pinging people on Slack communities that you're in. So, for example, our first customer came from a Slack community. The first customer once we launched the software. And that's an example where this is just not scalable. It's not like I can reach out to thousands of Slack communities and acquire a bunch of customers, right? So, but it's something that you do in the early days where you're essentially a nobody, right? And you just need to be visible. So what visible means is wherever your ideal customer actually spends the time in whichever platform that is. So it could be Facebook, could be Insta, could be Reddit, whatever they are, that's where you spend your time. This is where you build in public, and this is how you attract a lot of people. So you're saying, hey, I'll launch this really cool thing. It does X, Y, Z and solves this particular pain. And naturally, within your audience, right, on LinkedIn, you have a lot of people that have that pain. So other fellow sales leaders, for example, account execs, and a bunch of other people that really face that problem. So they're very curious about how am I solving that problem? Because naturally, I've been in the trenches, been doing this, right? So yeah, but you do the typical things from sending an email or to sending more emails to sending more LinkedIn messages to posting on LinkedIn the problems that you're solving, and just like these sort of little things. And we were able to really scale to $1 million in ARR actually through this sort of way of doing things to about $1 million in ARR without a single employee. And then we scaled actually to $2 million in ARR without a person in marketing, sales, or customer success or account management. So really the people that we started to hire up until $2 million in ARR was support. Support is super important. A lot of people undervalue support when they start a company. I always say, do you even have a chat box on your site? Like, can any random user just bump onto your site and just ask a simple question? Because a question doesn't answer all. So a website doesn't answer all the questions on the website. So if you agree with me on that, then you should have this sort of chat box where a user can just type in anything and can answer, just like ChatGPT, right? Because you're not answering all the questions. So like it's things like that, giving the ability, giving the ability for the user, for the potential customer, to approach you via the site, via LinkedIn, via X, in different social channels. So wherever they are, you should be in there as well. So we've been doing a lot of what we call integrated marketing approach. So I wanted to make sure that I'm visible on Facebook and a few Facebook groups. Then I did a bit on X, a bit on Reddit, a bit on LinkedIn, and so on and so forth. Because what happens is once you do these few things in these different platforms, is then some users will see you across multiple platforms. And once they start seeing you in different places, then the probability of a conversion rate or a person reaching out to you massively increases. I know a lot of people say, oh, I just use this one channel, SEO, for example, or whatever the channel is. Unfortunately, if you're really looking to scale and be, the one of the fastest growing in the world, you will realize that you will need to be in all channels, whatever your ICP is in.
But do you think it's even, just to interrupt, do you think it's even if you're not looking to scale and be one of the fastest growing companies in the world, if you're just looking to stay relevant and actually just maintain or just grow slowly, I think that what you just said is massively valid, because that idea of, your 7 touch points, 9 touch points, whatever it is, the number that they come up with, how many times you need to interact with someone before you trust them enough to reach out, like that must be increased massively by being on multiple platforms. Like, for example, really simply, like my podcast goes out onto YouTube, it's on my website, it goes on through Facebook and Instagram, and obviously on the podcast as well. And by doing that, I know that you're going to get multiple people being able to see you, like you say, in different places. So wherever they happen to be at that time, or they cross, and that just increases the authority massively. So yeah, I totally agree. I think it's relevant for every small business and big businesses alike. So yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. I think the struggle that some startups have is sometimes the customer is only in one platform, and then if your ideal customer is not in any other platforms, then yeah, maybe it's a bit of waste of your time, right? To be trying to increase your sort of, let's call it, impression share or share of voice, in other platforms. But if you have thousands and thousands, potentially sometimes millions of potential customers in one platform, just spend all of your efforts, in that platform. It could be just one, right? But in my case, you could say I was sort of, I guess, lucky because of my ideal customer profile and what is it I'm selling, that these business owners, salespeople, etc., they are in these different, platforms. So that's great for me because I can, sort of try and figure out what you should do, Reddit versus, YouTube versus so on and so forth. So, and I can tell you that it works. And I don't, I don't track naturally, a lot of business owners should be tracking, right? Whether something is working or not. And I don't track from a perspective of, oh, okay, what was the last click attribution, on Google? Like, was it a Google ad, or was it an SEO, or naturally a lot of clicks are coming from direct, right? In Google ads, in Google Analytics these days, right? But the best way, I think, to figure out attribution, whether something works or doesn't, you just ask a very simple question in the sign-up form: where do you hear about us? And you will realize the stuff that you see in there. It has to be an open field, so it cannot be a drop down. It has to be an open field. A lot of people make a mistake that they will put, for example, let's say we're going to say podcast is the first entry. Guess what will happen? People will, typically take the first option, and then they'll go and sign up. And then you'll say, damn, my podcast is working. But that's not really true, because typically there's a lot of people just click randomly and stuff. They just will click the first option, and then you're getting that, let's call it signal data saying that, oh, your podcast is working. But it's actually not actually the case, because people typically by default just click on the first option. It's because they're lazy, they don't want to really give you the real source, etc. So I would say open field, and then you get a lot of juicy information, what really works, because you realize the word of mouth. My boss told me to sign up. My girlfriend saw you on Instagram, but whatever. I saw you on TikTok. Sometimes you have even weird stuff like, I saw you on Pornhub. I was like, how is that possible? And it's just not just one entry, it's multiple entries. And I'm starting to think, what? How is that possible? It's just things like that. You're uncovering this rich data set, and naturally, when you see these multiple entries of a particular source, that's where you start digging further, right? You're trying to figure out, okay, maybe this is the place where I have to really spend more time in. And that's why I think, that is a gold mine. And that's really, that feedback loop is what really helps us. And I think it will help anybody. But I barely see companies, doesn't matter whether you do B2C or B2B, doesn't matter. I don't see that real, what I call, attribution. Now, the alternative to this is using some fancy software, which costs a lot of money, So for example, Dream Data is an example.
We used one called Hyros years ago for doing last click attribution. So yeah.
So but it's like too pricey. Most business owners, like in the early days, like startups, can't really afford that, right? But asking a customer, where did you hear about us? At least the sign up point is like gold mine. And then what you can do as a business owner, if you do meetings with your customers, you can ask the same question again, and you'll be surprised that the customer tells you sometimes something different in the call versus what they've input in the sign up form. But anyway, so like sometimes you can ask twice, and all of that are like super valuable data, because really you can supercharge your funnel really based on that rich data set. It's super powerful. So highly recommend.
I want to roll back because you were just saying, we talked about you when you started out, and we were talking about basically doing the graft. So picking up whatever it is, picking up the phone, getting into the social media, going into the communities, that getting exposure to stuff. And you said that's the way you did it in the early days. Do you like using a tool like Salesforce? Like, does that eliminate the need to do that, or is that the next stage? Like, where does Salesforce fit in? So, say for example, I'm starting a company, or if I roll back a few years, or even now, like I'm a small business, I don't really have a big sales machine. Like most of my leads come from referrals, and 95% of my leads come from referrals, and so this is something I was speaking before we just came on. This is something that I'm genuinely interested in the next 6 to 12 months in properly developing, because I'd like to have a more consistent stream of qualified quality leads coming in that aren't
Mhm.
reliant on referrals, because I think that's more sustainable and for the long term. And so at this point now, it's like the question marks in my head are like, where do I put my effort? Like where, like if I was to spend like say 1 day a week, 8 hours a week, just focusing on my sale, my marketing to sales conversion funnel, like where would that time be best spent? And like at which part in the funnel, like if we introduce something like Salesforce, like does that totally change the landscape, or is that in addition or next step? So where does it fit in basically?
Good question. I think there's multiple ways how you can answer this. I'll tell you one of the ways what may resonate with a lot of people, or something that would be eye-opening. But what you can do is like, so naturally you can use these softwares like Salesforce, for example, whether you use what we call the human path, right, where you can do things yourself, or whether you use the AI agent, right, to do a lot of things for you. But you don't have to be reaching out to people what we call cold, meaning really out of the blue. What you could do is what's called inbound led outbound. Let's call it that way. So you prime the audience. Let's say on something like LinkedIn. So I'll give you an example of what you could do, but practically speaking, let's say you figure out a list of your ideal customers that you really want to speak to, right? And the first thing that you want to do, what you were doing says you want to network, you want to connect, and you want to warm up that audience. So for example, what I would do is would connect with our audience, and then I would post, for example, on LinkedIn for I don't know, let's say 2 weeks at least before I would actually send out that cold email, so that when I reach out to them, to that individual via email, we're already connected on LinkedIn, right? And it's not like cold. They already, they're already been watching my content. Maybe they didn't like my content. They didn't click the like button, whatever, they comment, and it's fine. It's not about actually on LinkedIn and platforms like that. It's not about necessarily the likes and the comments. It's actually more about the reach. Are you able to reach your ICP? And did you generate a few impressions for that ICP? So did you have different pieces of content that they were exposed to before you would call them up, before you would send them an email, say via Salesforce, etc. And you see conversion rates massively increasing from that, because you have been warming up that audience, right? And so this is kind of one tactic that a lot of very smart business owners have been using. They're trying to essentially connect, with the audience, generate really valuable content. And then when you're reaching out to them, you're not a nobody. You're like, oh, Frank, I've been watching your content. It's super valuable, right? They're more likely to engage with you. They're more likely to jump on the call. They're more likely to expose your, they learn about your product. So yeah, before you engage, you educate, or what I typically love to say, you edutain. So edutain, that means education plus entertainment. So provide the content to your audience in the way that they love to consume, right? They want more of it, right? So it's this sort of gamification session. This is why a lot of people watch, TikTok and a bunch of other things, right? So they're really consuming that content aggressively. How can you do that? So right, for example, we're on doing a podcast together. It's about inviting people that have a unique perspective perspective on things, right? And so that you don't necessarily say what everybody else says, right? So your job, for example, will be to invite really good speakers, right? And kind of then showcase these speakers, right, to the audience, and so that you're educating these people as well. But when you're providing different angles to the same problem, right? Because I bet you have asked this question in the past: how do you use this tool? How do I think about pipeline, etc.? And different people will say different things. And then the audience, the user that's listening to this, makes up their own mind. What is really the best path for them? But I would say the best, what I would say, the best success that I've ever seen in the space is that a company does something different to all of their competitors. So essentially, if your competitors are acquiring their users in a particular way, whatever that way is, try not to copy them, right? Try to be in your own swimming lane. Try to do things differently. Position your product differently. Position your team differently. The reason why I talk about the team is because people just don't buy your services because you're selling SEO services or whatever that is. It's not just like this is what we do, but people just don't just rent your service or your product. They also rent your team behind the product. Because in a lot of cases, what happens is when people think about Salesforge, they actually go on LinkedIn and check out who's the team behind this, right? Because people buy from people at the end of the day, and they put a lot more trust into the team that's behind that software. So that's why it's also important, to be doing this, what's called founder-led sales, building in public, because people buy from people, and you don't just need to have one person, but there has to be, as you grow as a business, multiple people that spend time in these platforms, right? You have this sort of, let's call it a little army of influence, internal influence, what we call in-house influencers. Typically, that's 3 to 10. Imagine if 3 to 10 people would post consistently on a daily basis in the platform where your ICP spends, your results would massively increase.
ICP, ideal client profile.
Yes.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Something you mentioned then was building publicly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I know what you mean, but just explain that because I think it's an interesting point if I've got it right.
Yeah, so naturally, in the early days when you're like a nobody in the space, and nobody knows you, nobody knows what you're up to, you definitely want to communicate about your journey from the get-go, right? And a lot of people are excited about it because every founder's journey is rather unique, right? Yes, they're going through similar pain points, but the way they do that and is different, right? And you're essentially learning from the mistakes of those founders and also successes, naturally, what has worked, didn't work for them. And the fact that you're talking about it and you talk about the pain that you're solving for your ideal customer profile attracts actually ideal customers to you, all right, and to your audience as well. So when you start building in public and when you start talking about this pain consistently, day in, day out, you're attracting these ideal customers more and more to you. So they start following you and so on and so forth. And this is how you build a following. This is where you build this whole network of ideal customers around you, and you're essentially warming them up, right? So you are then, as I said, when you're reaching out them via email, even via LinkedIn, after like a few weeks, guess what? The conversion rates go up because you've been providing that valuable content and you're building your authority in the space. And naturally, if what you're saying on LinkedIn sounds and looks credible, right? Naturally, people are more likely to buy from you than anybody else, right? So you also think of it this way. So let's say if we're going to take, two competitors, right? A competitor who is super visible in these, social platforms versus the one that doesn't do anything in social. Typically, the competitor that has a very strong social presence outcompetes the one that doesn't have any social presence, right? So always think about, as I said, if your competition is very weak in particular areas of the business, let's say the presence on LinkedIn or something else, capitalize on that, right? So always think about capitalizing on something that your competitor is weak at. And a lot of competitors are weak in social media. So for example, we analyze our competitors, we understand where the weaknesses are, and we try and capitalize on those, right? So let's say what's our angle, right? I'll take an example. So we have a lot of competitors where the founding team of that software has actually never been in sales properly. So they have never led teams, that they have they haven't been really in the trenches when it comes to running a big sales organization. So the way that we positioned in our product versus the competitors is we're saying that this product has been built by former VP sales. And the former VP sales is building for other VP sales, as an example. Naturally, the other VP sales are able to relate to you because I know you had the similar KPIs. You took the same lingo, the same acronyms, and all that stuff. So they're more likely to buy from you because you've been doing their job in the past. So it's something that you can capitalize very nicely, kind of from building in public. And you say, as a former VP sales, I had a sales team of 50 and all that jazz. And this is how I think about pipeline. This is what I think about headcount. This is how I think about who should be in my team, who should not be in my team, and where do AI agents come into place, and so on and so forth, right? So, and that's something that you want to follow, not just, in the first year, but you just keep on consistently doing that. And I would say it's very hard, right? Because you spend at least like sometimes, an hour on LinkedIn every day. So that's at least a commitment of at least minimum commitment of 5 hours a day. Now, this is time spent well, because if you're connecting with your ICP on a daily basis, it's time spent well. Because I always say one of the biggest mistakes that the founders do is they don't connect with their ideal customers frequently enough. And you're lucky if your customers are in the platform like LinkedIn, and you can communicate at scale with them. Many businesses don't have that, ability to do that, to communicate at scale, and they have to jump on calls. And actually, there's a lot more work actually jumping on calls with multiple customers, because they're not online, they're not on LinkedIn, right? So, so the only way to engage with them is actually meeting them at trade shows, or meeting them, on a meeting. But we have the luxury to communicate at scale. And if that's the case, so meaning your audience is online, is one of these platforms, do build in public. Now, the downside, what's the downside of building in public? The downside of building in public is, if you have a lot of competitors, you should be careful what you communicate online. Because once you become successful, and once you start communicating how much revenue you generate, what's your headcount, etc., it attracts a ton of copycats. I had so many copycats that have copied our software, and naturally have resold it, sold the same thing essentially, just differently with different brand, etc. But they're essentially selling different. So be very careful what you say online, and like you need to kind of think about it, right? Don't say all the let's call it the secret sauce. Let's go that way. Don't say all the secret sauce online. Definitely try to don't amplify that on LinkedIn. I would say jumping, let's say, as a guest on the podcast is a lot more constrained than doing that on LinkedIn. Especially if copycats will hurt your business, right? So you have to think about that angle, right? So imagine if you suddenly have within a year another 10 competitors doing exactly the same thing. Is it good for your business, or is it bad for your business, right? So
Yeah. Okay, cool. So let's say that I'm going to go out there tomorrow and going to really focus on developing my sales strategy. I'm going to go out there. I'm going to get into LinkedIn more. I'm going to start posting more regularly, more personal content, connecting with my ideal avatar, or ideal clients, I should say. Like, where does using something like Salesforge actually how's that going to help me, and how's it going to reduce the time I need to spend doing it, but get better results? Because ultimately, if I'm going to, whether it's employing a salesperson or using some sales tool, that's really what I'm looking for, is how, like you said before, how can I reduce the cost of acquisition, and also the time of acquisition, which is ultimately almost the same thing in many ways, because time is money. So yeah, how does it work? How does it fit in? And I'm really interested from a personal perspective, like, where could I use this, or is this something that I could actually benefit from using the business, and why?
sure. So let's start from the beginning.
I'll break it down, Barney style, as they say. So keep it
Yes.
simple.
So like top level, typically, so you're looking to, ultimately get more meetings, right? So if you're in B2B, you're looking typically to get more meetings, because you typically sell over a meeting. Now there's three ways how you could generate that pipeline. Let's just focus maybe on outbound front, right? So when you're looking to reach out to customers, because a lot of businesses don't have the luxury of generating a lot of leads on the site. So let's assume you don't have a lot of traffic, like there's no customers on that, and we can only engage with customers via outbound. We have three options typically in the market to do that today. You can hire an individual, and you can give them a piece of software like Salesforge. That's option one. Option two, you can hire an agency, typically costs from £3,000 to £5,000 on a monthly basis. That's somewhere at the average, how much an agency costs. And they'll have all the tooling, etc. Naturally, they have all the expertise working with other customers on helping you generate that pipeline. That's option two. And that's arguably the most expensive option. Now, option three is these AI agents that have popped up essentially in the last year. Essentially, fully autonomous capability, which is able to build pipeline for you, typically across email, so cold email in particular, and LinkedIn. So these are the two channels where it really works very well. In voice, we have not seen that working in outbound, but there's definitely evidence that that's working on inbound. Now, so with Salesforge, let's just focus kind of on the human part because agencies and hiring a person, that's what we call the human part, where humans going to be doing all the stuff. So what does it help you with is so these days the problem is like if you're sending more than 30 emails as a sales rep in your company to other businesses, and you're trying to engage with a prospect and trying to get them on a meeting. Every email that you would send out is classified what's called an email that's coming from an unknown sender. You can call it an unsolicited email. There's a bunch of different names for the same thing. You're trying to engage with another organization. And typically, these emails are prone to be reported as spam, and you're also being very likely to be blacklisted by that organization, especially if you're going after, let's say, Fortune 500 companies, like essentially all the big companies, right? So all of them have a lot of software that protects the employees, so you don't engage with them, right? So it's very difficult to engage with them on email, much easier actually on LinkedIn in that case. Anyway, so because you can't really send a lot of emails, and sometimes small businesses have a huge TAM, they have thousands of potential customers that can reach out to, they can't really do that with one sales rep and one essentially mailbox. So this is how things used to be done in the old days. And sometimes you could scale, like you sent 100 emails back in the days when Google was nice essentially to all of us. And essentially sales reps could send back in the days like 100 emails. But today you can only really send about 30 these cold emails to to other different sort of businesses. And so the only way how you can protect the reputation of your business domain. So let's say our business domain is waitrose.com. We own that domain, and we want to reach out to different suppliers, right? And we want to get some good stuff in our stores. And if we're going to be engaging with way too many suppliers, again, as I said, the reputation of our domain may tank, right? What that will mean in practical terms is a lot of your emails will start landing in spam with your existing customers, with your investors, and so on. And you don't want that to happen. So the only way to really protect the reputation of your primary domain is to set up what's called these secondary domains. They're also called parallel domains. Essentially, it's a permutation of your primary domain. So, for example, teamwaitrose.com. Try waitrose.com and so forth, right? So you set up these domains, these adjacent domains, and these email accounts against them as well. You typically have 2 or 3 email accounts against each of them, and then one email account can send up to 30 cold emails maximum per day. So that's something that so that's something you can kind of set up manually by going to like a registrar, like GoDaddy, for example. There's a bunch of other domain registrars, but really it's very painful. So we take that care for the customer. So we make sure we set up these domains to protect having any negative impact on your primary business domain. So that's one thing that we do, and it's what we call a core pillar of success. There's other 3 pillars. Let's maybe expand those, and then I'll talk a bit about Salesforge. So one pillar is like this infrastructure, super important. The second thing is like you need to use a software that sends emails with a high probability of landing in the primary mailbox. So there'll be a bunch of different features. I'm not going to go into that. But essentially, some people use softwares like, let's say, MailChimp, for example, essentially newsletter softwares to deliver these cold emails. But this software is not really designed to do that. And there's essentially software that's really specialized in sending these cold emails, like Salesforce, for example, and a few other ones as well. Would that always really focus on this high deliverability when it comes to cold emails, right? So the second pillar is like use a software that sends emails in a particular way that's really designed for cold email. Now, pillar number 3 is what we call the copy pillar or the content. So what goes into the actual email? So like the content of the email, super important. So what is happening in the world today? So as I mentioned, Google is doing a lot of policing together with Microsoft. And so when you're sending out these emails to your ideal customer, and then your ideal customer, it may not be an ideal customer, essentially that person will then mark your email as spam. It sends a signal to Google that these are unwanted emails. And when Google gets too many of those reports, right, too many of these sort of reports, signals, etc., from the users, then Google starts to associate these spam reports with the copy that you had in the email. And typically, a typical business just sends a template. Right? So Google can see, oh, wow, this piece of content gets a lot of spam reports. And then what will happen is you'll start landing in spam because of the content, not because of your domain, maybe, etc., like waitrose.com. No, it's because you've been sending the same email to like thousands of people, So what is very important these days is naturally the relevance and personalization matters a ton these days. Because the problem, if you're not going to be making these emails relevant to that particular individual in the organization and making them super personalized, then the recipients will report you as spam. And a lot of people do that. Like, I do that, you probably do that. We all do that, I think, right? So we all mark a lot of people emails that we don't like because it was a template, it's not personalized, it doesn't tackle your pain, and you will mark it as spam. So the essentially what I'm trying to say is, like, we're going to go into this sort of world where I'm calling this, the death of templates. We're going to see a lot more personalized communication that will be delivered to every single person. It's like advertising, right? So ads became more and more personalized to human level, to that particular person. We're going to see exactly the same thing happen in email to improve your deliverability, hence improving your results within the world of email. Super complicated, but can be done. So then the final pillar, right? So imagine we have the best infrastructure, we have the really cool sending software, we have an awesome copy, but the final piece, which is very difficult, is targeting or the leads. Who is it that you're sending this email to? Essentially, what happens is if your targeting is on the spot, then naturally with the great copy, great infrastructure, etc., you're gonna get a bunch of replies, a bunch of meetings booked, etc. But sometimes it's very difficult to figure out, the audience, who should I be going after, right? And it can ruin everything for you, because if you're targeting the wrong audience, they'll report you as spam, but even though it's super personalized emails, because you're off the market, and it happens very frequently. That's actually the most difficult pillar, like figuring out really the individuals that I want to be reaching out with my particular product and the pain that I'm solving for them. So yeah, these are the 4 pillars. So we solve all of these 4 pillars. So we have a software that helps you to send emails in a particular way, where the likelihood is very high to deliver and land in primary. Then we provision the infrastructure. Then we can help you craft a unique email to every single recipient, and not just one email, but actually multiple as part of a campaign. And then the final pillar is leads. It's something that we're launching this month. It's called LeadsForge.ai. So we have multiple products. I'm going to explain that also in a bit. But we have this product called LeadsForge.ai. It's a bit like ChatGPT. We're launching in a few weeks. And you'll be able to ask a question, hey, I'm looking for 1,000 leads which match this ICP, so this ideal customer profile. And that's what I'm looking for. And then we connect that to multiple databases in the world to deliver that list for you. And then you can execute that list, let's say, in Salesforge. So we take care of all these pain points for the business.
Cool. That's awesome. And I love this idea of sending non-templated, auto-generated emails, because it is like, I mean, I have someone manage all my emails for me, and the first thing I ever do is, if it's a non-personalized email, it gets spammed. Like, that's like, let's just say, as you're saying that, then it's just like the amount of rubbish emails that I no longer get, because we have somebody actually sat there as a gatekeeper. And that's what most people do, whether it's through some fancy software or just a person or just your own common sense. It's like, just delete, delete, delete. So that is awesome. One fear that just came into my head when you were saying about lists, and I want to go and get 1,000 leads, is, I know my only experience ever from sending to a not unsolicited list, because most of my emails go out to people who are subscribed for one reason or another. They've either booked a call with me, they've subscribed to my newsletter, they've been on a webinar, etc. They've got some reason. I've got some reason, and they've always ticked a box to say, yeah, send me some stuff. A bunch of unsubscribe, and that's cool. I'm not for them. That's not a problem. But one time I did a LinkedIn webinar, and the people that registered on that webinar, I sent an email to as a follow-up. And that I got something like a 50%, like it flagged up and stuff. It was the only time ever in 8 years did I have a problem with the emails that were sent out. And it was just a follow-up email. It wasn't salesy, it wasn't a big whatever. It wasn't spammy. It was just continuing the conversation, I thought. Which I've done many, many times with many people. So whenever I hear about lists getting scraped, that was actually people who had registered for something I put on, but they didn't attend necessarily, and that was the mistake that I made. And that's the fear that I have, that wherever this data is coming from, it's going to be basically unsolicited to these people. And like, I know you mentioned about protecting your main domain by using subdomain, or not subdomain, they use a different word for it.
Secondary domain.
Secondary domains, which I get and I understand that, because I'm aware of that issue. But I still have this fear of the reputation, I guess, of like, I'm just going to basically send out and spam a lot of people who don't want this thing I've sent to, and it's going to end up one way or another, indirectly or directly, affect me as a business. I think that is a fear that us small business owners have. How does, like, is it a irrational fear, or is there a reason that isn't something I shouldn't be worried about?
I mean, this is a rational fear, but the reason why people don't respond to you, in a lot of the cases, is because one of the things that you can't control in the world of sales is the timing. So, you think of it this way: so at any given moment, there's only about 2 to 3% of your buying population who's in market to potentially buy the stuff that you're selling, right? So, think of 2 to 3% only. This is also the reason why we need a list of 1,000 individuals instead of 10. So we just don't know who these individuals are that potentially are interested in our product, that where we can definitely know, we have validated they definitely have pain. Yes, you will need to reach out to a lot of people. Yes, you are thinking to yourself, I may be harming my brand. But I always say, don't send bad emails, right? I give the user to opt out from the communication, etc. What you're doing is, it is legal, right? You are able to reach out to another person, but you need to make sure that they're able to opt out from
Or
further
another
communication.
business?
Yes,
Be
yeah.
clear, yeah, yeah.
So B2B, yeah.
Yeah.
Not in B2C, but in B2B, yes.
Yeah. Just to be
You
clear.
can reach out definitely to another business, and because there's a legitimate intent, right? You are solving a particular problem for that business, and one piece of advice that I want to give to the audience, maybe that's the only key takeaway maybe that we should have here, is when you are reaching out to another business, try and not talk about your product, your service that you're selling. Try and validate whether that business has a pain that you're going after.
Yeah.
Had this friend of mine from Australia, he always used to say, hey, listen, no pain, no gain, no demo train. Like, if the prospect doesn't really have that pain, there's nothing to be gained from your service, your product, really. You better be moving on, and you'd rather be asking, hey, I totally get, you don't have that pain. Do you know anybody in your circle that may have this pain? So asking for a referral is super powerful. That's something that's being done in the US all the time. And I think in Europe, we're still struggling on that aspect.
Yeah.
So you better be off doing that, and following a really nice, what I call, business etiquette, right? So, but don't be annoying, right? Don't send like 10 emails in a campaign or something. Send only 2 emails. So a quick email about, trying to validate whether the prospect has a pain, and then maybe another follow-up email in a week's time, right? And the reason why I'm saying that follow-up emails are important, but don't send like 10. Like, that's very annoying. You will get a spam report, essentially. But do send only 2. So first one, try and validate the pain. No pain. Second one is the solution to the email. First off, the reason why you're doing that is that, so if the time is typically off, so you reach out to the individual, you send these 2 emails, and it's a bit like impressions. You showed some ads, so you can look at the emails as ads as well, right? If there was no response, right, there's no click through, like in the world of ads, no click, essentially nothing happening. Fine, most likely it's the timing. As long as you know this is your ICP, this is your ideal customer profile, reach out in a quarter's time. So that means the way that you solve the timing problem is, because priorities can change on a quarterly basis typically. So you sent a couple of emails, there was no response, fine. As long as they didn't unsubscribe, you then send another couple of emails. Again, another uniquely crafted. Maybe something happened, like US elections recently, right? And you may kind of change your email based on what are the recent events in the world, right? So, and you do that 3 to 4 times a year, and this is how you can actually maximize the pipeline that you generate for your small business, rather than sending 10 emails. Right. So you need to understand, you can't, like, even though these are your ideal customers, you cannot close 100% of them. You may be best case closing 10%. That's best case. But on average, it's 2 to 3% who are potentially in the market for what is it that you're selling. So if you know those numbers, yes, you need to scale, but you also need to be polite. You don't want to be ruining your brand. Don't send horrible emails. Essentially, look at that email and maybe send it to yourself, send it to your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever that is, and ask them, what do they think about it? Right. And if they say it's horrible, it most likely is, right? So how can you change that? All right. Seek help, read stuff online, go on YouTube, watch some videos on how to write really great
That's
emails.
ChatGPT.
Or ChatGPT, yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
there's a lot of
that's
tools.
the first
Don't
place.
be lazy. And there's all the tools and the knowledge in the market. Just use that. And you'll get into the swing, into the swing of things. How do I get a reply from the individual? For example, please do reply back to me if this is not of interest to you. Like, getting even the reply back improves your deliverability. So it's things like that.
Brilliant. Perfect. Okay. We're gonna have to draw this to a close very soon. Is there anything else you'd like to say? Anything I've not asked you that you think would be super helpful and important for people to know before we wrap up?
Yeah, I would say, a lot of business owners don't want to scale, don't want to have big headcounts, right, etc. And so we scale, to 12 months ago, there were only 3 co-founders in the business. Right now, there's 40 employees, right? And we scaled from sort of $0 to $3 million in 12 months. So the scaling is super fast. But one thing I would caution, essentially now when it comes to headcount, right? You don't want to get to a situation where you're laying off people at any point, right? It doesn't matter how big or small you are. So one of the things I highly recommend doing is that when you feel like you're scaling, quite a bit of a headcount, try and think about, okay, are there any tasks in my organization that could be fully sort of let's call it automated? Anything that's super repetitive. And typically there is a solution to that repetitiveness. I'll give you a couple examples. So there are two tools. Maybe somebody knows in the audience called Zapier. So Zapier is a tool that automates a lot of the things for you. Now there's a lot more, let's call it cooler or like new gen solutions. Let's call it make.com or N8. So the number 8 and so N8N. So there's two solutions where it can automate essentially anything in your business. So the way that I typically sort of thought about it is, so I used to work at Google. So at Google, everything is automated. Everything is automated, and all the crazy stuff, everything is automated. So you have that feeling that this is like a machine that's just running and running and running. It doesn't. It's not about more or less headcount. You just kind of sit down, you open your laptop, and everything's running. So if something's gonna bad happen in your business, you're gonna get notified. If something good gonna happen in your business, you'll get notified. And essentially, you feel like these workflows, these automation workflows, look after you. So essentially, these are automation workflow platforms where you can build a lot of interesting workflows for your business. So for any business that's out there, to help you automate repetitive stuff, so that you don't have to hire people to do that for you. Even let's say looking after replies from your customers, even on inbound, etc. And it's super powerful. So you can plug in some AI agent in there and so on and so forth. Most of the businesses, small business owners, are not really equipped to tinker with that tool. Me neither, actually. So I decided to hire just a guy, part-time, working 10 hours a week, and all he does on a weekly basis, he's responsible to give me extra 10 workflows. So that's really his KPI. Please produce for me 10 workflows, and we always feed him with more ideas on what is repetitive and what we want to get rid of, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to get into this flow, you will automate a lot of the stuff, and you will feel like, after probably a month or two, wow, like everything's so running so smooth in this business, so.
Yeah, I was just going to chip in because I think that idea of hiring basically an automation lead in the business, an automation champion, if you like, is massive. I am absolutely, I fell in love with automation many years ago, but it's also an Achilles heel for me because it means that I get dragged into it when I'm the business owner and I shouldn't be doing automation. And so one of the roles that I went out to find was this kind of role. It's like, who can actually build this stuff for me? Because I've got all these ideas. And know that I don't want to grow a big team unless I need a big team. And so I want to keep it lean because I've done the opposite. I went too big too quick and then had to lay everybody off, exactly what you just described. So I've been there. The second time round, if you like, that I was the opposite. I've actually held back from hiring and gone, okay, like for example, we were looking at I'll give you an example. My client today, he was talking about doing he's basically income and all that, chasing up clients for money, basically that flow. I can't remember what the word is. His income stream account. That's not the word either. Anyway, he basically was looking at the manual process that he does of basically taking this PDF and a spreadsheet and putting it through some process and then uploading it. I was like, why don't you just automate it? And he was just like he hadn't even thought of it. And like for people like you and I, like you've been in Google, I've been passionate about automation for many, many years. It's like that's the way our brains work. And it's so interesting that when you speak to people and they're doing these processes and you're like, oh my gosh, like that's just like born, like it's just like I automated that in like the first week of my business. Like, but that is something that people don't actually realize. I'm so glad you brought that up because it's one of the things that I'm most passionate about and I'm a big champion for. And it can massively reduce costs, even though there's a cost of implementation. Because once you do it once, as long as you do it right, there may be better maintenance, but it's like that's done forever. Like you can tweak it and improve it and whatever, but actually that's it, it's done. And so much of why my business now runs smoothly is because we've got automations and we use Zapier heavily because we wanted to keep it simple so I can train my clients on Zapier. We also use automations in our CRM. And yeah. So massive advocate of exactly what you just said. So I'm really glad you brought that up. Brilliant last point you made. And I think that the fear that I hear a lot of my clients talking about with hiring staff is that fear of, and for myself as well, it's like you become responsible. for that person's well-being in your head, whether that's true or not, like their livelihood, and that if you were to let them go, then they would be in a worse place. And that may or may not be true, but that's the feeling that I definitely had, and the feeling that a lot of people have. And I think that with AI as well, and using tools like Salesforce, for example, like you can reduce that need to have this big team and
Mhm.
still do incredible things. So
Yeah,
awesome.
exactly.
Keep up the good work.
Yeah, our sales team is only 3 people, that's it. That's how small
Yeah,
this.
yeah. No, that's impressive. That's impressive. Cool. Frank, before you do go, I always like to ask my guests a couple of questions. The first question is, of all the apps and browser plugins or tools that you use, you're not allowed to say not allowed to say Salesforge. Like any other apps, maybe apart from Zapier as well, because we mentioned that. What do you use or couldn't live without in your business?
So that would be definitely Slack, because naturally Zapier would need to talk to Slack, the
Yeah,
command set where people communicate. I would say Slack is where we live and breathe, day in, day out. Because naturally, Zapier or whatever other tools, they're just automation engine. But anything that has to, with informing you, I don't think you should be informed by email. You should be informed by Slack, so you can have other people looking at the stuff. So Slack is the
I
definitely
agree.
one.
Yeah, good one. Any others?
So maybe it sounds simple, but we like to explain something to a customer. Would use something like Loom or other video recording solutions,
Yeah.
like having a recording solution. Any of them, there's a bunch of them out there. Like I would definitely recommend using a video solution to explain to another business what is it that you do, how you do it, etc. Because we all get send a lot of videos, sorry, a lot of emails, and it's just pure text. But it's very refreshing when you get a video from another party that explains to you, and that's superior customer service or sales service generally. And something I enjoy, and I think my customers enjoy that a lot as well when they get a video from me explaining some stuff. Yeah, these will be probably the two of them. You can kind of go on because I use a lot of tools out there. But you kind of have to keep it simple, because naturally when you're racking up these tools, you're also racking up your software costs, right? And I'm very frugal in that sense. I want to deprecate everything I can, literally everything I can. Why are we paying for this? Why are we paying for that? You have to be watching your bottom line. So the fewer tools, the better is in my eyes. I always like, why can't we do it on Excel? If it's like a one-off task, etc. Why are we buying a tool for something? So.
Yeah, yeah. No, I totally agree. I have reduced my software bill by it's now a fifth of what it used to be. So I reduced it by 80% because I just would realize that I've basically been that, hey, shiny penny, let's go and buy that app. And then you get more staff and blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But I also think that keeping it simple is so important. Like the two tools you said there, well, three, Zapier, Slack, and video for communication.
Yeah.
Like basic stuff, but without that, if you've missed the basics, the fancy stuff is just a waste of time, in my opinion, because the big gains are with the simple stuff. So yeah, totally right.
Mm.
Cool. Last question for you. This podcast is called Systemize Your Success, but what does success mean to you and why?
Success means to me that you're doing something consistently. So I'll give you an example. Let's say when you're sales or when you're former VP sales, you look at what's called activity levels. So if you have X activity levels, so we're sending X number of emails, we're doing X number of calls, we're doing X number of things essentially, right? The activity levels. If you're doing that at a particular level, you should be hitting your target. You should be successful, because we run some math, right? If we're doing these things on a daily basis, right, and we run that as a process, every day we're doing the same thing, we should be able to hit our targets, and that's what success to me means to me. Without that, it's very hard to be successful if you don't have a very, very good process in place. And that's just typically just, as I said, just one thing, just look at, okay, we're trying to acquire customers. What are we doing on a weekly basis to get to the number of meetings we want to have on a monthly basis? What is it that we need to do? How many emails do we need to send? How many calls do we need to do? And if you do that on a daily/weekly basis, you will be successful.
Cool. Frank, thank you very much for your time today. Real pleasure speaking to you.
You too.